before we get into some of the points that we're going to talk about, I've asked each of the panelists to reflect briefly on the use of technology in supporting assessment in general. And today we're particularly thinking about formative assessment and trying to encourage students to get a better understanding of what good looks like. And I was thinking about that myself and about my first significant example of where technology made a difference for students. And I cast my mind back to 10 years ago when the organisation that I was working with at the time piloted an AI formative assessment tool with secondary school students in Kent in the southeast of England. And we had about 1,000 students involved in the pilot. And it basically was a little avatar that the students could ask questions to on screen if they got stuck. And the idea was it was to deal with a lot of the stuff that teachers get asked all the time, the sort of little stuff that they get asked, that detracts from their ability to cater for the dealing with the larger questions and the larger discussions that come up in the classroom. And I remember talking to a child who had just gone through this process, and they'd come up with this fantastic project at the end of it. And they said to me, this AI has been fantastic. It's really helped me do well. And I remember thinking and looking at them and saying, well, was it really the AI that helped you do well? Because all the AI was prompted to do was ask questions back to the student. It didn't tell them anything. And the student, suddenly you had that light bulb moment in the student's mind where they realized that it was them that had come up with the project and that the AI had supported them on that journey. And for me, that's what really meaningful formative assessment is about. So that's my little intro into this. Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about any particular thoughts that you have around technology and formative assessment?
Yes, so actually carrying on your theme, I first came to BETT in 2001, and I was doing a talk on one of the first internet-delivered online tests called World Class Tests that some of you may recall, and they are what we would now say are images put behind glass. And we were doing some research in trying to develop interactivity on screen and seeing what would happen with test takers. And that's where I think something really interesting happened for me in terms of thinking about the test takers themselves. And those of you who know me or know anything about my work know what I'm most passionate about is how we help the public, and particularly learners, understand the use of assessment, how valuable it is in every aspect of learning. And when I talk about assessment, I really mean assessment. I don't just mean tests and grades and exam results. I mean, how do we assess what we know and learn and can do? And I think new technologies have so much to give us there. And I think that's what's really exciting for us in all phases of education at the moment. Obviously, I work in a higher education institution, so we're already seeing some of the impacts of AI-led technology. But I've also been doing research with awarding bodies looking at how test takers understand AI, what they think about it, what they think it is. And that's something that's been extremely valuable in recent years. And I think in terms of assessment literacy and then helping learners learn and understand what they know, these are the parts of actually putting these bits of the jigsaw together is something that we still don't know how to do it yet. We're learning how to do it, but that's why we need to have conversations about it, about what good assessment looks like, about what learning looks like, and then where does that intersect with the value of new technologies. So I have my 2 minutes.
No, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary. Aftab?
Teachers conduct formative assessment to support learning. So at the heart of formative assessment, it's about the learning process. And to support learning, feedback is crucial. So if generative AI can be used to support teachers in the feedback process, then that will enable and enhance the learning process. And if feedback can be delivered in a timely basis at the closest point of action, then students can reflect on that feedback and take their learning forward. So it's that immediacy that students have when it comes to feedback. And we've discovered over the years that the feedback from the Gen AI services is of a high quality, especially if it's been informed and directed by specialist teachers who underpin its use and behaviour. So I'm very much an advocate for using generative AI to support the feedback to students. One of the things that we've discovered is feedback literacy and the value of feedback literacy among students and teachers. So it's thrown up lots and lots of questions around what do we do to enhance feedback literacy for students and teachers alike.
Brilliant, thanks, Aftab. Dan?
Yeah, I think I'm most excited, especially when it comes to formative assessment, of putting the power back in the students' hands. So, we traditionally, student does a bit of work and then they've got to wait for that kind of validation from the teacher to say, this is good, this is bad, this is how you can improve. But to put, again, like after I was saying, I think this is where some new AI tools and capabilities, I'm seeing the most, it's where I get excited the most, is where students can get that feedback in real time, and they're not relying on the teacher having to see it first. Now, obviously, the teacher still has to be in that loop, but that feedback loop being closed many, many, many times before the teacher has even had a look at that student's work, I think is amazing, absolutely amazing. And we can see students progressing so much before the teacher has even had a look at that work. And it's going to empower the student. It's also going to empower the teacher to be able to progress the students further at a faster rate. And I think we're now at the precipice of some amazing tools coming out that can help us do that. And another thing, one more thing I'm really excited about is, how do we validate learning rather than assessing what we've taught? So I'm really keen on this idea that students aren't just learning when they're in a classroom with a teacher; they're learning all of the time. And how do we validate that? How do we let them see that that's a powerful thing, and give them the I suppose the motivation to want to do more of that, and let them know that our schools, our colleges, our universities appreciate that, as well as just them knowing what we've taught them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That touches a little bit on something that Sir Stephen Fry was saying this morning in his opening piece about education being about trying to pull out of the students what they know, what they don't know, and being able to nurture and bring all of that together as a learning process, which absolutely, you're right to say, doesn't just happen in the classroom. But just going back to the idea of feedback, because we've touched on that in a number of things we've said. There's a view that the feedback loop is an intrinsic part of the learning process, which it absolutely is. Have you come across examples in your work where technology is helping to shorten that feedback loop, is helping to maybe close it multiple times within a relatively short space of time to allow iterative learning to take place? Aftab, do you want to kick off with a couple of examples, maybe?
Yeah, over the last few years at Bolton College, we've developed a platform called First Pass. It allows the teacher to pose an open-ended question to his or her students. The students see the question on the screen. They can compose and draft their answers on the screen, but also to inform that writing, they can speak to a chatbot as they compose and take their writing forward. So when they speak to the chatbot, they can ask a whole number of questions about their writing and how to improve upon it before they submit it for the teacher for final review. We found out that from many, many students who've used the platform, that feedback at that moment in time is very, very valuable, because especially if they're working independently away from the rest of their peers and away from the teacher. And the teachers are also saying that immediacy also improves the quality of this final submitted work as well. So that's, in terms of educational outcomes, that's one of the things that we've discovered. And also the feedback that the teachers give to their students is of a higher order as well. Teachers spend less time giving remedial feedback, and they've got more time to focus on the feedback that is important to them and their students. So technology does support, in a really productive way, the role of the teacher and the student.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose it's that immediacy in that particular scenario of getting that feedback timely at a point where it helped them move to the next step which is the most important thing. We've got a question, and I say we've got a roving mic. Have we got a roving mic? I am looking at the booth. We have. There is a microphone coming to you. So just in the middle here, lady in orange.
Thanks so much. I was just wanting to ask a question on that point, and I work for an online school for neurodivergent learners, and so that, what you've talked about is really useful, and I was wondering if you find over time, I don't know if you track it, but over time, do they ask the chatbot less? So if they've practiced that open-ended question and they've had help, and now they've practiced a few more times, are they relying on it less? Obviously, there's always improvement to be had, so maybe they aren't, but I guess the questions would change. So I'm just sort of seeing, how does that go over time, progression-wise?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. And I don't know whether you heard that, Aftab, because
Not all of it.
No. So the change, the amount of time. Sorry. Over time, are they asking less? Are they asking more specific questions that build on the stuff that they had feedback on first? And I apologise because we can't hear you on the stage, which is why I stepped out.
Yeah, for students who can't articulate a question and they're struggling to know what the question is all about, we have a button on the screen where they just give, where the computer just gives them feedback straight away, and the computer tells them what the assignment's all about, what the teacher's after. But what we've discovered is that students over a period of time develop more in-depth questions. So students at level 1, level 2 tend to ask quite basic questions. And one of our tasks is, can that questioning technique become better over a period of time? Questions at level 3, level 4, the undergraduates, the questions that they ask is obviously of a higher level. But one of the things that we want to improve and collect data on is precisely that. Do students become more informed about feedback literacy? And does that feedback literacy enhance the types of questions that they ask, when they ask for it, how they ask for it?
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And I guess it also relates to assessment literacy as well, because they're getting a better understanding of what good looks like through the feedback that they're getting as they iterate the process. Dan, any particular examples, great examples you've seen of feedback, AI or other technologies being used to support that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two tools that come to mind actually that I've witnessed a number of schools here in the United States using really well. So the first one I think about is a tool called Brisk. And Brisk has a great feature now where I know many of you will be familiar with it, it's a Chrome extension that offers multiple generative AI tools. But they have a great feature where if you press Boost, it allows you to take a resource and turn it into an interactive generative AI that the students can talk to, essentially. And it will, as the conversation happens with the student, what it will do is it will kind of measure in the background the conversation against learning objectives. And then it gives you like a bit like a progress bar. So it tells the student how far they're getting with their conversation, and if they're demonstrating knowledge that's meeting the learning objectives. I know a few teachers who are using that in a really good way at the moment. And in a similar way, there's a great tool called Snorkel, which is a way for students to verbalize their answer using artificial intelligence. So the teacher will set the question, they give them a blank whiteboard, or they can put something on the whiteboard to assist them, and then the student will speak through their answer, and they can interact with the whiteboard, they can write on it, do various things on it. They can click submit, and then the artificial intelligence will assess what's been said, assess what's been written on this whiteboard, and then about 20 seconds later, it gives some verbal feedback based on a model answer that the teacher has given it. And then I think the most powerful thing is a little button in the top right-hand corner that says, go again. And then so they can get the feedback, click go again, try again many times as possible. And then the teacher, when they get round to looking at the student's work, they can view all of those tries, so they can see a timeline of that student progressing without them. And I've seen that being done in really powerful ways. What concerns me though is there has to be a culture underneath that.
Yep.
Because I know when I was at school, something like homework was, I did it to get it done. And when I got some feedback a few days later, I wasn't too concerned about it. So we almost need a culture that underpins that motivates the student to want to get better. And now we have the tools that can help them do that without having to go back and forth all of the time with the teacher.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mary, any examples you've seen?
I think in higher education, one thing that we have used a lot in recent years as well is harnessing more audio feedback for students and thinking about that. Because we know theoretically from the research we do with how learners learn and what motivates them, there are actually quite small changes you can make to really improve feedback, hook the learner in, engage them, etc. And often it's being able to use your voice in particular ways. But the other thing we find is that obviously UCL is a very international institution. A lot of my students don't have English as a first language. They find audio feedback immensely helpful because they can play it back through a script. We give them what we call jumping off points in the feedback so that they can hook into areas of work that need doing, but they can replay it several times. And that's the kind of feedback we've been getting from students. And that, again, is a great leap forward for us. And I actually, find it as a teacher much easier to be able to talk a student through a script rather than having to annotate the script a lot. And often you're not sure, have they got the nuance of that writing? And also, have they just opened a Word document with loads of track changes on it and immediately felt completely demolished by that feedback that's happened to all of us at some point. So it's about thinking of ways we can get that balance.
Yeah, and I suppose that sort of leads me on to my next question, which is really talking about the role of technology and how that sits alongside, or dare I say, replaces the teacher. So we've got, Dan, you mentioned tools like Brisk, which is a great tool for supporting that feedback process, giving that immediacy and allowing that next step on the process of the learning. But do you ever see a time where Brisk replaces, or other tools like that replaces the teacher's role in that formative assessment process?
I suppose in a simple answer, I don't think it replaces the teacher, but I think it could replace some of the tasks of a teacher. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good thing, to be honest. I think tools that can free up a teacher to maybe spend more time on the creative element. So for example, let's say one of these tools I've mentioned, students have progressed independently with the AI. We still need the teacher to check the progress. Like it's the bread and butter of a teacher. How do you plan for the next learning experience if you don't know where the students are at? But if that then gives that teacher 2 more hours, for example, because they're not having to write so much feedback, but 2 more hours to then design the next learning experience, take on board the progress of their students, then I'm all for that. I think, so this is not a replacement, but I suppose it's an augmentation.
Yeah. And
we do that a lot, don't we? We augment what we do constantly, and I think this is an augmentation, and if it allows the teacher to be more human at the end of it, and I think in an advanced artificial intelligence world, which we are heading into, the key attributes of the people in that world are going to be our human characteristics. So I think we're going to have to focus more on how do we be more human with our students, how do we help them become more human in this world. So I'm all for taking tasks off teachers' plates to help us to focus on that.
Yeah, I often think that it's a shame that artificial intelligence, that the A stands for artificial, and it would be a much easier thing to accept if it was augmented intelligence, because ultimately that is, I think, in an education space, that is a much more comfortable place for teachers and for people in general. Aftab, have you found that in the college? So you've got your Ada chatbot, you've got your first pass tool as well. Is that sitting alongside, has the teaching changed? Has teachers' input into that formative assessment process changed? over that time?
Teaching and learning and assessment practices haven't fundamentally changed. So I'm quite pleased that the fundamentals haven't changed, but the way we do it has changed, and the tools that we have at our hands has developed and changed what we do and how we do it. But one of the things that teachers have always said over the years, and students as well, is how do you increase student agency? How do you support their independence in their learning? And the tools that we've got around us do support agency. They do support the students to become more independent and more autonomous with their learning, and to become more confident in the learning process. The worst thing is that you arrive at a new college or a new school or a university and you have no idea who to ask the question to. If the chatbots are there, they ease the introduction to any student into a new campus setting. Also, if you're at home and you've got a question, you've got no one to turn around to ask that question, especially when you're doing a formative assessment task, and the Gen AI chatbot's there to help you, then that is a nice thing, that's a good thing. It improves that student's agency. It improves the independence that student has around their learning. So traditional teaching and learning and assessment hasn't disappeared. All the things that are good about it are still there, but we just have additional tools to support the students and the teachers in that endeavour.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just thinking, and I'm conscious that we're rapidly running out of time, but Mary, you've got a particular interest in that assessment literacy and the agency we're talking around here of helping students to understand more about what good looks like, and any reflections on what you've seen and how the technology impacts the approach to the teaching in the formative stages?
I mean, I think I would definitely echo what's already been said, is that I genuinely don't believe you can, come and tell me I'm wrong in 5 years' time. Okay, it's fine, I'll be retired. But I don't believe that the human teacher is going to be superseded in any way by any kind of AI technology, because a piece of AI or any other kind of technology can't assess a classroom when they go in. They can't get that sense of what's happening in the room. They don't have the nuance and those attachments. And I think it's helping people understand the difference between where we use new technologies effectively and what we use, and whether it's AI generated or not. That's really important. And I think for me at the moment, one of the most exciting things is that I use generative AI almost daily. I certainly use it in every teaching session I have, and I use it with my students to help them see where differences, where nuances are. And I'm talking about, the students I work with are expert teachers and leaders who are doing a master's course. So they're looking at that, and then we're talking about how does that then translate back into a school classroom or a college classroom. And I think going forward, those are the really important conversations that we need to be having about not just what we're using, but how we're going to use it, and how we use that to help young people see, all these potential careers that we don't even have names for yet, what it might be in the future. That's terribly exciting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I'm conscious we're nearly out of time, but I think we've got time for at least one more question. We've got the mic. If we can come to the gentleman with the glasses with his hand up here.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Dr. Ben Levy. I'm a psychologist. I've got a particular question, which is whether there are any AI tools currently around which can measure in real time how likely students are to achieve the lesson objectives.
Good question. So, any AI tools that are around at the moment that help predict the outcomes of the student, or the likelihood of the student's outcome? Anything that you've come across that looks at that? Dan?
Yes. I think, let me caveat this by saying there's so much potential with these tools, but we still, I suppose the thing that slows them down is the business side of it and the human side of it. So I see a lot of tools that are kind of in production around this, but one that really stands out for me, and it's quite a niche tool, so and they're here actually, Olex AI. So they really specialize in schools teaching British curriculum and teaching English. But they're developing an AI-powered analytics tool which is able to measure the progress of students over time and give the teacher that ability to zoom in, but then also zoom out and see the trajectory of that student. So that's what comes to mind for that. But I'm sure there's probably 10 other tools in production at the minute that will get it. I think we're like in the 1997 of the internet at the moment, where we're starting to see glimpses of the tools that will be available soon. But yeah, all XAI, if you're an English teacher with a British curriculum, is really good for that. There's probably other tools as well. It's hard to keep track of them all.
Yes.
So I'm sure if anybody knows of a tool, go speak to this guy afterwards and let them know.
Thanks, Dan. Aftab?
I think for a high-stakes environments like the education sector, we shouldn't be using prediction machines to find out if a student's going to pass or fail a particular learning objective.
Mm-hmm.
I think we shouldn't go anywhere near that. Prediction engines are not good, they don't work, and they should have no place in the education sector.
Well, and I think a lot of other people will agree with that, but it is interesting to explore as a notion and see where the technology can take us. But obviously, one of the things we talked about as a panel before we came on stage was the idea of technology being for a fit purpose that you want. And this has always been a problem in the EdTech space, is where technology is put in front of us because it's good technology and not necessarily that it's solving a problem that we have. And I think that's always a very useful sense check that we should use as teachers to make sure that we're using technology appropriately. I am conscious that we're out of time. We had so many more questions to go into, and my apologies that we haven't got round to talk about all of it. Just before we finish, I need to give a quick plug to an organisation called the E-Assessment Association. We are a free organisation to join for anybody who's interested in the whole world of using technology in assessment, whether that's summative or formative. We hold an annual conference each year. This year it's in June in the centre of London, the 9th to the 11th of June. So give that a quick plug. There's also an awards programme that runs alongside this for celebrating best practice in using technology in assessment. The calls for those submissions to the awards programme is open at the moment. I think the closing date is the 12th of March. So if you're involved in a project which is using technology in formative or summative assessment, then please consider entering the awards. It's a great way of sharing that best practice. I am chair of the judges as well, so I'm duty bound to say please enter, because it's always fascinating to see the breadth of submissions we get from right around the world. And there's a QR code that will take you to the EAA's membership sign-up page. As I say, completely free to join. I'd like you to join me in saying a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much for all of the thoughts you've given us, and thanks also for you joining us today and inputting as you have.